welcome to the headline interview with me, Anthony Baxter. My guest today is the Master Tailor, Andrew Ramroop, OBE. Originally from the West Indies, Andrew became the first black businessman on Savile Row in the 1980s when he bought the suit-making firm Morris Sedwell. He continues to run the company and is also the principal of a tailoring academy. Thank you very much for joining us this lunchtime.
My pleasure.
Let's just go back to your roots. You were born in Trinidad in the 1950s. What do you remember of your time growing up in the West Indies?
Well, it was very exciting. You know, Trinidad being noted particularly for sunshine, beaches, carnival. My influence was very much carnival costumes and so on. So my style now has developed from that kind of influence to flora, the fauna, and the excitement of growing up in the foothills of the northern range of mountains. In the valley there was rivers. I learned to swim in the river as opposed to the beach. And so it was a very exciting upbringing. The street or the road that I grew up on had both sides of the street were lined with coconut trees. And so it was idyllic, actually, not paved, but graveled roads that took you up onto the hills. It was an interesting background to grow up in. Exciting, playing in the forest and, you know, climbing up trees and picking fruits and sitting on the branches and consuming them.
And yet, from a very early age, you had your sights set on London. Even before you left Trinidad, you'd already decided you wanted to become a suit maker, a tailor. Where did that come from?
I'm not quite sure where the influence came from in learning to sew. Perhaps it was a lack of having clothing myself, or too much or enough clothing. I felt that I could make clothes for myself. But initially, I learnt to do what you might call origami, cut up newspapers and stick it together with sellotape and pins, and really try to make garments out of it. And my mother reminded me that I was about 9 years old when I cut one of her pillowcases into the shape of a pair of trousers and used one of those. We didn't have electricity, so we used one of those hand sewing machines. And I sewed up the outside leg and the inside leg of this pillowcase and created a pair of trousers, washed it and hung it up on the line to dry. And I showed my mother, look at my trousers that I made. I can't remember what the consequences of that was, but you know, that was the early beginnings of showing an interest in making clothing.
You worked with many of the big name tailors in Trinidad before the age of 17, but at 17 you decided you were coming to London. Savile Row in your sights. What did your parents think of that you were going to get on this boat and head over to the UK and no contacts, no real idea of where you would go?
Well, you know, it's interesting you should ask me that, because sometimes if I think back now at age 17, to leave Trinidad, get on a sailing boat, first time I've been on a boat and sailing all the way to Southampton, it was quite an undertaking for a 17-year-old. I had saved enough money, paid my own fares, and coming here, not knowing anyone, that was a huge challenge. But I aspired to Savile Row. I had heard of Savile Row, where the captains of industry, politicians, prime ministers, presidents had their suits made. And like a young athlete wanting to be in the Olympics, you know, I wanted to be in the Olympics of tailoring. And Savile Row was the place for the best tailors in the land. And to be a part of that was my ambition. And so having left Trinidad, I sought employment on Savile Row. I left school at a very young age. I was just under 14 when I left school. So from age 14 to 17, I served a long apprenticeship. So I knew how to make suits when I came here. I had made myself 2 suits. I went to Huntsman's looking for a job, and they employed me. Straight away, and one of the biggest firms in the land employed me as a young tailor. And so I got my opportunity at Huntsman's.
Let's just talk about that first experience of walking down Savile Row. Can you remember it? What were the emotions? What was it like to see this place that you dreamt of?
It was a mixture of excitement and trepidation. I was used to back home in Trinidad where we all had individual buildings, not a row of buildings that were joined together. So it was quite traumatic in a way to find that Savile Row, which I've now discovered, or later discovered, is very much a street by appointment. It's not a browsing street. Just alongside was Regent Street and Bond Street with a lot of people shopping. But Savile Row, there were hardly anyone walking along Savile Row. And so when I went on looking for a job in Savile Row, I felt that oh, what's this exciting place that I'd heard of? I couldn't see the excitement from the outside, but of course the excitement was behind closed doors. And so it was a mixture of trepidation and excitement, I guess, you know.
You mentioned that first job. As part of that, you also gained qualifications, is that right? You managed to get O-levels at the time. Did you see it important as to make sure you had the skills but also had the qualifications?
Well, the qualifications and experience that I needed, both academically and, of course, learning the trade, they were important for my growth. And I felt, having left school at a very young age, at that time I hadn't really read a book. You know, all of my development academically came much later on. But at Huntsman's, I was kept in the back room, and I felt if I wanted to get ahead, even though I was a good young tailor in Trinidad, if I wanted to really get ahead and have a sound career as a sartorial artist, I needed formal training. And I needed formal training from tailors who had worked in Savile Row. And so I went on to the London College of Fashion. I signed up for a full-time training program for 3 years, which I completed actually in 2 years. And I was told I was the only student that actually was invited to complete a 3-year program in 2 years. My prior knowledge was very, very useful. But, you know, learning tailoring and not having a sound academic background was, you know, I could learn the skills of handcraft tailoring, but training myself was important. But actually getting a sound academic training was also important. So I signed up for evening classes, and I learned French, mathematics, English language, and English literature. Those were the 4 courses I started. Now, from elementary education, from age 13, straight on to O-levels, that was a huge leap, huge challenge.
It was the College of Fashion course which led you eventually to Mr. Maurice Sedwell. I think this is the 1970s now. 1974, you became an assistant cutter there, and that turned out to be a partnership and no doubt a friendship, which went on a lot longer than perhaps you first expected it would do when you first met him.
Well, you know, initially, being one of the only persons that got a diploma, distinction in my diploma, having left the London College of Fashion, I found it really challenging to get a job because I changed my direction. Having done tailoring for so many years, I wanted to be at the front of the shop. I wanted to design. I wanted to meet customers. I wanted to take measurements. I wanted to do fittings and actually be a part of the front of the shop that developed the business and from the embryonic stage of taking an order to completing a suit. Now, to get that front of shop job was a real challenge. And so I got turned down for many a job, even though I was highly recommended. And the only guy who would give me a job is Maurice Sedwell. And I have to say that, you know, he was more forward-thinking. He had the confidence in his business. He didn't feel that having a West Indian at the front of the shop a threat at all. And so I'm so grateful that he saw the future in taking on someone of ethnic minority.
I was going to say, it sounds like there were race issues here linked to the reasons why you struggled to find employment.
Perhaps there were race issues, but, you know, coming from Trinidad, I didn't understand racism. And so I was very naive. For me, I felt that I wasn't fit for the jobs, and I got turned down for 10 or 11 jobs. There were just 8 graduates that came out of the London College of Fashion, and having come out highly trained and looking for a job, there was something like 22 tailors looking for staff. 8 graduates coming out, 22 tailoring houses looking for staff. So, you know, you're more or less walking into a job. The industry would swallow up the graduates that came out of Savile Row, came out of the London College of Fashion. But to get into Savile Row, that was the challenge. And I think the other employers did not have the confidence in employing someone of ethnic minority, a West Indian. But Mr. Sedwell was forward-thinking. He had been in the Navy during the war. He had traveled the world. He had been more open-minded, open to other cultures, and he gave me that opportunity.
And fast forward 15 years or so with him, you took over the business when he retired. You kept the name, but now run it to this day, and it's developed somewhat since then. It's become a global brand.
Absolutely. You know, having taken over, bought the business in 1988, now I was paying the rent. paying the salaries, and I had to develop a business. Although it had been established since 1938, Mr. Sedwell started his business in Fleet Street in 1938, and then won the best tailor in the land competition in 1956. He wasn't, at 1956, he wasn't on Savile Row to be taken seriously, even though he'd won the gold medal for the best tailor in the land. To be on Savile Row, it was important to him, and so he moved in Savile Row in 1963. I started in 1974, and in 1988 took over the business. So with a good track record, a sound track record. But of course now Mr. Sedwell wasn't there. It was important to me that because Mr. Sedwell had been so generous in allowing me to buy his business, there was continuity, and it was important to me so that I can actually keep the name. And for me, it wasn't building Andrew Ramroop, but it was me building a business for the future. If you go into Marks and Spencer or Harrods, you wouldn't ask for Mr. Spencer. You go into Austin Reed, you wouldn't ask for Mr. Austin Reed. But you would. It is building a business for me that it was synonymous with quality, with service, with the best tailoring on Savile Row. That is what was important, and that is what I focused on. So keeping the name Maurice Sedwell there, of the past, of the present, and for the future, that I would build a business to become synonymous with good tailoring, honest tailoring, tailoring that a company that become known for committed to excellence. And there is where I started from. And so building the brand now that we've made suits for customers in some 60 countries, that was important to me to grow and to develop and to attract foreign revenue and become a global brand, if you like, a household name, perhaps in the households we want to be named at, but being a household name. That was very important. So really, with my business plan, with all of those values, I then began to focus in developing a brand that would become known, a name that would become known, as I said, for quality and service.
We'll touch on some of the celebrity clients that you've had since then. We are going to have to take a short break, but stay with us. Plenty more to come on today's headline interview with Andrew Ramroop. Hello there, welcome back to the headline interview with me, Anthony Baxter. My guest today is the Master Tailor, Andrew Ramroop, OBE. Before the break, we kind of had the CV part, really. They're from arriving from Trinidad up to taking over Maurice Sedwell's in 1980s. The 1990s were a difficult time. We had a recession in the UK. You talked about how you looked further afield outside of the UK to try and bring in revenue, keep this business alive. Quite quickly, there were the likes of Princess Diana and the celebrities, the politicians who were knocking on your door asking for suits. How did you manage to more than keep it alive, bring in those huge names?
You reminded me, very interestingly, of the recession. During the recession, when other companies were closing down and lots of empty premises, that was the opportunity I had, that I actually grew and developed the business. At that time, I took over the business in 1988, as you said. Now we're coming on to the early 90s. In the early 90s, I became so busy. During a recession, I was very, very busy. I was looking for larger premises. First of all, I was introduced to a customer who was Mr. Mark Lennox Boyd. He was PPS to Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. And Mark Lennox Boyd was in very close contact to a lot of the MPs. And I had tailored 2 suits to Mark Lennox Boyd that he was very, very pleased about. He had been to another Savile Row tailor, and he had been introduced by another customer to us. And so when Mr. Lennox Boyd came in, and I made him these 2 beautiful suits, he recommended 20 MPs to me. And at one time, I had 6 cabinet ministers as customers. And not long after that, Princess Diana became a customer as well. So to have these high net worth individuals, these well-known people, and those who, it was important actually to project a right sartorial image, we have those people as customers. But when we got into the recession, I felt, you know what, I need to look farther and wider for business. And so I wrote to a number of people in the United States. And in the early 90s, February 1992, I made my first trip out to the United States. And then soon after that, that year, I got as much business in the United States only as my turnover had been here in the UK. And so it was almost like being unemployed and suddenly getting a job, because there was a lot of business coming in from the United States. I outgrew the premises at number 9 Savile Row, and during that recession, I started to look for larger premises. So I was in the fortunate position of being very busy and finding premises that were cheap. And so then in 1994, I moved into number 19 Savile Row. So I moved from 500 square feet of space that Mr. Sedwell had to now 2,000 square feet of space. So it's quite a huge growth. But as I said, starting to export, it was like getting a job from being unemployed. But being on the ground floor of number 19 Savile Row, I was very, very lucky because I found an address whereby it was also like being unemployed and then getting another job. So the growth and development of business, being on the ground floor, was very, very important because the program that taxi drivers did, the knowledge, if you did the knowledge and you had to drop off a passenger on Savile Row that didn't know where they were going, they dropped them off at number 19 Savile Row. And do you know the number of new customers I got just because the taxi dropped them off at number 9 Savile Row? Because the first window they saw was number 19 Maurice Sedwell, and they actually came in to see us, made an inquiry, and I got quite a number of customers as a result of that, actually. So it's being fortunate, being lucky, really.
Do you think there is an elitism about it? I mean, suits at Maurice Sedwell don't come cheap. We're looking, I think, around £4,000 to start off. Do you aim for it to be an elitist kind of industry and an elitist profession to some extent?
My aim is to produce the finest suits in Savile Row. And by virtue of producing the finest suits in Savile Row, it's actually the finest suits in the world. We do not sell a suit on its price. We sell a suit very much on the value of cutting and fitting and an expression of individuality, of style, of comfort, of elegance, perhaps to draw attention to yourself for being well dressed, drawing attention to yourself that you care about projecting the right sartorial image for your customer, for your business environment. And so it's not so much on the price. It takes us in the region of 130 hours to hand tailor a suit. And if you look at pounds and pence in relation to the time it actually takes us, it's not an expensive. It becomes expensive if you can't afford it. But perhaps you can't afford to project the right sartorial image in a business environment. And it actually is not £4,000, it's £5,000 we start at. And so it is, I have to say, I can't afford my own suits, but I can't afford to not project the image that I sell. And so it is important that selling a suit, more than actually, not selling a suit, but a customer buying into a sartorial image, first and foremost, rather than buying a suit.
I just want to step away briefly from the work that you do as a tailor and talk on the academy side of things. You created an Academy of Tailoring in 2008 to try and help more young people and boost British talent. Why did you feel it was important to do that?
Well, I have been on Savile Row now for 46 years, and from my first job at Huntsman's. Now, I did a feasibility study. I commissioned a feasibility study in around about 2005, 2006, and the feasibility study was delivered to me in end of 2006. And that feasibility study proved my expectation that the average age of tailors were quite old. In fact, it proved to be age 61. There weren't any new tailors coming into. The trade wasn't attractive. And I tried to, as president of the Master Tailors Association, that we change our constitution to guarantee training and to guarantee internship for students and trainees and to adopt an apprenticeship program and adopt formal training. And as president of the Tailors Association, my idea of actually training new people and changing the constitution were turned down again and again and again. And I felt the only way to address the growing age of tailors and to get new people, new blood into the industry, we needed to provide training. And if the Master Tailors Association were not willing to adopt training as a program, then I have to do it myself. And so I resigned as president of Master Tailors Association and started they started a Savile Row Academy. Initially, I trademarked Savile Row Academy, and on January 8, 2008, I started the Savile Row Academy. And do you know, from a growth from 6 new students, we now have 20 students training to become Master Tailors from 2008 to now. So there is a demand, there was a demand. I think perhaps businesses weren't confident enough. They were afraid that if they took on new apprentices and they trained new young people, they were going to leave after they were trained. There was value in that. There was value in that because if you train someone and they leave, then you didn't get any value. And there was value in the fear, I guess. But I've always taken the view that if you had the confidence to train young people and they stay with you, it was much better than if you trained them and you didn't train them enough and they stayed with you. If you trained them and they left, then that was much better than actually didn't train them enough and they stayed with you. And so I train and I train and I train, and now the industry swallows up all of the Savile Row tailors, all of those that came out of Savile Row Academy.
We are quickly running out of time. There are 2 key votes coming up that I want to talk to you about. First of all, the referendum. As somebody who has looked elsewhere for business, if we leave the EU, will that be bad for business in the UK?
It will be disastrous for business if we leave the EU. We've got an open market in the UE for I don't know how many hundreds of millions of people, an open market, and we export a lot within the EU. And it's very, very important that we stay in. I think it's a fallacy to want to come out of the EU. You've got a foot in the door, you've got not just a foot in the door, you've got a whole body into the door. Why step out? I think it's completely wrong.
The Mayor, Boris Johnson, seems to think that it is a good idea and that it wouldn't affect trade.
I truthfully do not think that he believes it is a good idea. I think it's for political gain, and he's trying to secure his own personal future. He's very, very selfish of the Mayor to come out against staying within the EU.
The second vote that we have, of course, is the Mayoral Vote, and I know that you're a champion of small businesses. What does the next Mayor of London need to do to support businesses and specifically those startups and young businesses?
I think it's very, very important. Business rates is a very important factor, and I see the Chancellor is actually touching on that subject, which we welcome very much. Business rates, I think encouraging young people, encouraging businesses. Also rents is horrendous. Rents are horrendous in the West End of London, and I think perhaps looking at how the structure of rents are in the West End, it's actually works against the growth of small businesses. We want to employ people, but if you have colossal high rents that actually keeping back the growth of businesses, it means we can't put out new apprentices, and we can't put out enough funds to actually train and to have new staff. Because we're working for landlords now, and landlords are not actually protecting us. Of course they want better returns. So I think rents and rates are important areas for helping us to take on new trainees.
We are unfortunately out of time. I just want to very, very quickly talk about the OBE. For you, what was that moment like? In a brief synopsis, that moment of meeting the Queen.
Absolutely exciting. I'd always wanted to meet the Queen personally. It had been a dream of mine. I'd put it out into the universe, and to have that opportunity to meet the Queen and to be presented with perhaps the second highest honour was very special to me.
Andrew Ramroop, thank you for being a headline interview today. Lovely to meet you.
My pleasure.
There we go, the Master Tailor, Andrew Ramroop. Thank you for watching at home. Stay with us on London Live. We'll have the latest news, travel and weather for you after the break.